Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's meeting of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club. We're your hosts this evening. I'm Tobias, and this is Will. Tonight, together, we have a number of curious and exciting topics to share with you.
As attendees of the Hand-Eye Supply Curiosity Club, you're all now members, provided you adhere to our philosophy. Ex Curiositas Scientia. We pledge to learn without prejudice in pursuit of our mutual goal, perpetual noviceship. We admit that it is impossible to know everything about anything, and thus we remain perpetually curious and perpetually novice.
This is our flag and our mascot, Franklin. The lightning bolt represents the receipt of knowledge, the enlightenment of illumination, the resonance of truths understood. It awakens and excites us and makes us hungry for more. Curiosity Club is made merrier by our fellow artisans at Fort George Brewery in Astoria, Oregon. And now let's give a warm Curiosity Club welcome to guest Nicklos.
Thanks, guys. Franklin. It's a bit dramatic of a title, I know. It's something that I've been trying to fit into something for a really long time. Whether it be a song or a title of a talk, I guess. But it wasn't until after I found the name and sent it to Tobias that I realized where it came from when I wrote it down. Because you start to lose touch with words. Words are written on a page, and then they become their own thing. They lose connection to the moment and the intention behind them, unless you're incredibly eloquent and succinct. I have dyslexia and ADD, and I had to learn ways to learn better. I had to learn workarounds to internalize what came naturally to other children. And as you can see in this scene from Rushmore, I actually did this. I went to a little trailer that was in the parking lot of a middle school, and I took this test. One of the tests was with blocks, making it look like the other person's. There was actually a bunch of tests. The thing was, I've always been very creative, and I didn't see... I don't know if mine looked like that. Probably not that like Bauhaus. I just thought it was fun. I was like, this is cool. None of my classmates get to go to this special thing and play with blocks and have a dude in a coat, have Bill Murray interview you. And I've kind of seen it as a blessing. I couldn't trust words because all I could see was a bunch of letters with no hierarchy. And to a 7-year-old, 6-year-old who is learning how to read and write, it's frustrating to transpose was and saw. Like all the cliche things, those were all me. It was pretty severe. So I had the dyslexia thing, which made me see things abstractly, and then I had the ADD thing. So I'd start to read, and I'd get 2, 3, 4 sentences in, and I should have done a chart of this. It's like if the page is here, my attention would start with the letters, but then after about 2 or 3 sentences, my attention would just it would go where it needed to go. It would start responding to the words. And I think that response is something else that is still with me today. There was no place for my eye to rest on pages like this in school. It seemed that the longer I'd look, the words would move around and blur. But I found typography through design and an advantage. I had to work hard to trick myself to focus on the problem in the moment, to block out bias, and to take a beginner's mindset, which is one of the things that really attracted me to being here and speaking with you all. Because I think a beginner's mindset's extremely important to any type of problem solving. Whenever we become overly professional, it's a reason to refine ourselves out of doing anything special. You can create something that's so precise that it stops feeling. And it's why the best songs are like demos, you know? The first take, when the guitar had that amazing sound. And when things get overly professional, they become sterile. So with the beginner's mindset, I try to accept the intention of the moment and the communication So there are a slew of great resources dedicated to setting typography, designing typography, as well as type history and graphic design. I can provide a link at any point. There are a lot of talks on YouTube. I'm not going to focus on that side of typography. There's plenty of it. Instead, I ask myself a question: what can I bring that's different, that's unique to me? And I hope to bring that. My wife said to me, who's here? Hi, Erin. She said, "You got to simplify, man," because ever since I started working on this and writing notes, I think I have about 3 talks that I could do. And yesterday I had 80-something slides, and I cut it down to about 35 today. In doing so, I cut a lot of the typography out of the slide. So we're going to go up into the clouds, and we're going to talk about a lot of kind of theoretical things, and hopefully afterwards, you guys will feel like you see things differently. And feel free to chime in and ask questions too. These are all really good books. Josh wrote that one. So, masks and patterns. I'm going to focus on things that I find interesting, discoveries that I've made, and moments that inform my design of type. Humans are metaphor machines. We make a discovery, and then we see if it applies to something else. It's at the core of who we are. So, in 2001, I decided to stop pursuing graphic design, and I started going back to school to be an anthropologist because I thought I'd make more money or something. I don't know. Bad choice as far as money goes. But I learned just a treasure of information. And I got to go on a dig in Greece, and part of being able to go to this dig is you had to take this honors anthropology class. And pardon me, this class was really thick. It was like reading Noam Chomsky. It was really difficult, but I remember I had a stapled handout by Clifford Geertz, who was an anthropologist, and he talks about masks and patterns. And it really affected me, like the way things affect you when you're a child and they stick with you. And not many things happened to me in my 20s that were that impactful. And so the idea is that your relationship with your mother and your father and your siblings and your close relatives and your first friends, those all become masks of other future relationships. So if you have a problem with your sister and then you kind of have a problem with your mother, maybe you end up having this same type of problem with all females. Or if you have a relationship with your father that's very protege-like, and then you end up having a respectful relationship toward another teacher, you end up creating these types of bonds throughout your life. So that's masks. Now, patterns mean that your masks might change, but you repeat the same behavior over and over and over again. And we're complex beings, so the same behavior, we might have the same behavior, but 7 of them are going at the same time. And they basically intermingle and create this pacing of who we are. So that might mean that you make the same mistakes, you underestimate time, you take risks, you play it safe, you fight commitment. These are the same types of things that you repeat through your life. So you have your masks and you have your patterns. Now, what makes this interesting is that I have no filter when it comes to seeing things abstractly. So when I learn something that's great like this about, sociology or anthropology, and I internalize it, and then you say, okay, you're going to spend 5 months by yourself looking at a font and designing that, I start to think about all kinds of things. And one of them is the way that masks and patterns materialize in typography and in design and in branding, and how really they're the key to creating visual language and creating a richer typographic experience. So I want you to meditate for a moment on this image, and then so think for a moment. HIJKLMNOP, right? No?
Oh, I wonder what you are.
Let's try it again. Yes, sir, yes, sir. 3 bags full? No? So the melody is shared by 3 nursery rhymes. Something I know because we have 15-month-old twins. So it dawned on me as I was working on this, because, again, the abstract filter thing, I'm singing these songs and I realized they're all the same melody. They couldn't hire another songwriter in olden times to come up with another melody. Masks and patterns. So in this case, the melody's the pattern, and the lyric to the song or the intention of the song is the mask. I was going to sing them originally. My wife talked me out of it. Thank you. All right, quiz. Mask or pattern?
Mask.
Right. Mask. So in this case, patriotism, everything that we learn in school, it's part of this shared idea. Like you have you over here and your entire experience as a human being, and then you have everybody else's entire experience as an American, let's say. That's easier. And they all cross over and they create this common visual language that we can all tie into. And in this case, there's this commonality. We're all indoctrinated to be Americans when we go to school, and smart branding people know how to brand. So I don't know if the colors here are evident, but It's supposed to be a red and a yellow. And you can't use red and yellow together, right? Everybody knows you can't use red and yellow because why?
I can't see it.
You can't see it. Okay. No reveal. Because McDonald's ruined it for everybody who wants to use red and yellow together. I can't tell you how many times I've been in meetings and somebody will say red and yellow, and it'll slip your mind that red and yellow doesn't work. And then you'll look at it, you'll think to yourself, come on, I can't use this. It's happened twice this year already. You have to have the McDonald's conversation. It's genius branding. And it is what it is. But what this is all getting at is the value of visual language. That if you look at the red and the yellow that you can't see, those are just two colors. That's just a piece of communication. And in the creative world, so many times your direction is to just take some font and throw it on a page. Just use Helvetica. I love Helvetica, but if you're using it with the intention of just use Helvetica, you might as well just use Comic Sans because it has the same amount of intention as you just saying use Helvetica, you know? But there's so much power in color. We have such a powerful, complex sensory capacity as human beings that we can clarify and enrich the experiences that are typographic. So that brings me to a point about typography. It's a technology, and that's something to remember. People forget that language was our first technology, but typography is a technology. And we continue to evolve its meaning. Now, when I'm talking to people at family reunions or if I'm taking pictures and they ask why I'm taking a picture of their sign, you know, and I say, I'm a typographer, I guess, you know, that's always weird to say. They always say, well, where's your tripod? If you're a typographer. Sorry. But no, it's really happened a bunch of times. So many that I know it's called a theodolite is the name, and I'm probably not pronouncing it right because I've only read it on Wikipedia. But if you read about it, it actually sounds really interesting. Typography is the craft that carries our narratives. And it's the environment in which words live. The words that label and give us more meaning to our environments. Typography is a time machine and a record of the past. A past that we may never have known about if it wasn't for. I can't read that though, so I still don't know. This is Tara Arbach, and it's probably 10 years old, but I still think that this is an excellent example of really pushing the limits of abstracting typography in a way that's very beautiful and elegant and detailed, and it was different in its time, and I still think it is very different. I think if we continue to push the limits of legibility and abstraction, we can take ourselves away from the message for a moment to live in the clouds, to lose ourselves, and through that confusion of creativity, we can find something truly special and, I don't want to say original, unique. So I take these photos. This is, you can't really see it as well with the light of the projector. They're the letter N, and it's really easy to do. And I included them just for the fact that if you think about it for a moment, and you can convince yourself that that's what you're looking at, then maybe you've won a little bit. You convinced yourself that things don't have to be as they are. We just agree that they are. I love this so much. I stopped on Foster. I pulled over. I ran out on the street and took a picture of it because I passed it like 4 or 5 times. I think it's brilliant. I mean, it's the A and the P together to make, because that's what an R is, right? And it brings it back to the beginner, the novice way of seeing things and thinking about things. Like, that's not a mistake that a professional would make. But I mean, it's horrible, but it's wonderful and beautiful at the same time. It has so much character.
It looks like a Foster sign, for sure.
It does look, yeah.
Foster Boulevard sign,
yeah. I mean, I could write a whole thing about this. I mean, look at that.
Also 2 words.
Carpet, right?
But it's a typical running out of space toward the end.
Yeah.
We're going to compress it a little bit.
Yeah, like when you're writing a card, you write somebody's name and it's not centered, and you're just going to add a little thing there. Sometimes something that's affixed to an object can blend in so well that it enhances the experience, and it takes this mundane and it turns it into an enigma. And I think this is a perfect example of capturing a moment, because a week later it wasn't there, you know? But it's preserved, and it's really gorgeous. It was really gorgeous in person. The colors were like perfect. It gave meaning to it. And the question that I ask myself when I am on a road trip and we're running late to dinner with friends or something, and I pull over, and Aaron says, "What are you taking a picture of?" It's because it's there for us to fall in love with. I mean, you can't really see it as well, but it says please, and there's this kind of paint over the top of it, and it's just absolutely arresting. And it's so powerful, and there's so much emotion in it. And I think it said, like, please, no smoking or something. And it's not there anymore. It was a condemned building, the one with the U on it. And they've redone it. So again, I preserved a moment. That sign there was an intention behind the sign, and the intention was not to have someone paint red stuff over it and then have a crazy guy who takes pictures of signs crop it to make it make a statement. But I did. You know, there's all of a sudden a political commentary and a US West sign on a phone booth if you're looking for it. Knowledge of typography is growing, you know? Before people were texting using real fonts and keypads, this would have never happened. But now it's probably happened to everyone here. And this is not the only time that this has happened with her. A few times. I tried to keep most everything original in here except for this, because I think I saw this at one point and I just think it's really funny. I mean, what can you say? Whoops. I have to interject. With designers, I really don't like Comic Sans. I really don't. And I really love Helvetica. But I'm not part of the religion of frustrated designers that love and worship Helvetica and, you know, smite you down for using Comic Sans. That Comic Sans is perfect for intentionless design. If you don't have intention and you just want to throw something out, just use Comic Sans, because it's. I've seen the documentary. The dude who did it, that's cool. He made a thing called Comic Sans that doesn't really look like a comic anything, and then everybody's computer not very literate relatives started using it for things. And we all bag on it. There's a lot of bad fonts. This one just gets used a lot.
Why do you think that it has such a broad appeal for being as hated as it is, or disliked? It has such a broad appeal. I mean, I still, to this day, interact with professional people that, have set their email Comic Sans, which is like, it blows my mind, but obviously it had some sort of really broad appeal, because it's a choice, it's chosen, it's not arbitrary. There's some intention, even if it's not an intent to design, there's some intention somewhere that's pulling people towards Comic Sans, mindlessly maybe, but they're really attracted to it, and the fact that that it's still popping up in my email from people that are have jobs where they're members.
Well, it's a pervasive typeface, and it has been for a really long, 10, 15 years. It's been very popular in circles. We'll just say circles.
Opposed to Chicago, right? The original 15.
I cut my Chicago slide out. I had a great one with Chicago. I'll send it to you.
And there's I don't remember how many it was exactly, but there maybe it's 15, 20 that you would get in Microsoft Office or Microsoft. But Comic Sans, there wasn't pervasive, Chicago wasn't pervasive.
Well, it's fun. It's fun if you're using a PC 10 years ago.
Yeah.
That's a pretty brutal experience. You got to find fun somewhere. And you're looking at the fonts and you see Times, and then you see Helvetica, and then you see a bunch of other names, but to you it just looks like Times and Helvetica because it's this small and bitmapped. And then you see the one that looks like somebody wrote on a window after they breathed on it. And you think, that's fun. I could use that. And I keep wanting to just dog on a certain demographic of people, and I gotta stop. But that's one of the reasons why I think that it's not as bad. No, it is. It is as bad. But I don't want it to be as bad as it is, because the misuse bothers me, because I design type and I lay type out and I see signs of bad kerning and it kills me. And then you see Comic Sans, but it's kind of, it doesn't bother me as much as it used to. Now it's more like, just like, oh, hi Comic Sans, there you are. It's like a weird, happy piece of information that I'm planning to not read that's following me around in my life. It's like a little game I play. Yeah, I don't think we should dog on Comic Sans as much. Well, you guys can. I don't think I should. So, words and letters are just shapes. They're just shapes that we decided mean something. And I think it's, a lot of what I say, I'm sure, comes off as extremely obvious. But they're probably things you haven't thought of recently. They're probably things you've overlooked. And I think that that's why it's important. That you can look at shapes and you can put these shapes together. It's amazing. You can put these shapes together and say a sound that goes with it, and then have a meaning that goes with that. And then you put another word in front of it and behind it, and there's a different meaning. It's incredible. And then you put another couple words and it's an entirely different meaning. You put no in the middle of it, or a comma, or a question mark, or exclamation point. And because we use it every day, and because we all read, and because we're all literate, we overlook those simple facts. But it's through those simple facts that we'll find a new, interesting way of utilizing typography, and of evolving it for the next whatever happens after handheld. You know, how are we going to use type when we're just thinking stuff and it's like words, ether? We're going to have to do invisible fonts or something, voices. So our visual discoveries can inform what we create, and we have these opportunities to see if we choose, and to give the written word more meaning. We have built our civilization on shapes that we agree mean something. We can't agree on anything as a people. You know, we can't agree on Chinese or Burgerville. How do we agree on laws and taxes that we then build civilizations on? It's remarkable, but it doesn't have to look like shit. There's a deeper intention when you do something. I beg you to just think about it. The most mundane task. Think about it. Take a second. Because you might make your own day better, or you might make someone else's more connective, or communicate better. Or if you're a professional in design and typography, you might create better work, or you might open up a door that leads to something else that is truly remarkable, that you wouldn't have anticipated or been able to plan. Because problem solving is not about planning, it's about problem solving. It's about reacting to the moment and serving it. Serving that moment the way it's asking to be served, not the way you want to serve it. Our experiences can be so much richer than they are. The things we make us. So make it count and make your words ring true. Thank you. I cut all the stuff out, the other 48 pages or whatever. But I work better in dialogue anyway. It was really hard for me to put this all together, such an expansive, broad subject. So if you guys have any questions or comments, or I'd love to respond.
You mentioned earlier that you were dyslexic, and I've noticed there's been some efforts to create fonts that are easier to read, supposedly easier to read, but I've also heard that they don't work, or that they only work for a certain subset because dyslexia is a wide range of capability of reading. Do you have any fonts that are easier for you to read that have been successful for you, or what do you think about that whole design of font for greater dyslexia readability?
I was really interested in the first one. I've seen the one that the base of it is kind of heavier. Kind of looks like it's pear-shaped in a way. And I tried reading it and seeing if it made me feel any different. And it didn't really do anything for me, but I worked really hard to kind of thwart some of that. So I mean, maybe for a child who is going through the phases of trying to understand syntax, and maybe it would work for them. But that's not to say that I beat dyslexia or ADD. It's like one of those things that's like a battle people joke about a lot. You know, the dyslexia joke is, I'm trying to remember now. It's like this is whatever. It's a backwards thing. Because it's dyslexia, right? Because it's backwards. In the ADD one, you know, everybody's like, I got ADD. Well, no, you don't. It's actually a little bit harder. But I mean, the things that are difficult are the things that make us see things different. It's one of the reasons that, you know, when everybody else was reading, I was drawing letters. So I guess it paid off for me. Yeah?
How do you approach choosing a font with intention, as opposed to just knowing how many minutes?
Yeah. The funny thing is, like all my business documents and everything's just Helvetica. But there was intention behind it. It's the legibility. And also just that it's a beautiful typeface. So for me, it's very intentional to use. But I think when solving a problem, you're trying to create a experience for people. I mean, whether you're designing a building and trying to create a space for people to, you know, use it as a bank or an art gallery, museum, or if you're trying to create a workspace environment, or if you're trying to create a book that has 8 million words in it, but it's real small. Or I guess what you do is you look at the conditions. You try to put yourself in the person's shoes who's going to be using it, and then try to create an experience that's going to foster a relationship with the goal. You know, but that's not too. For me, it's about creating and fostering a relationship between whatever it is that I'm designing and the person who's going to interact with it, because it's all for people in the end. So choosing a typeface, I tend to go back to the well, you know. I tend to go back to the fonts that are the classics because they've been tested. I tend to stay away from the brand new font unless it sings to me right away. Because they do sometimes. I mean, sometimes they're really well designed. There's a new version of Nicklos Grotesque, which is like the original version of Helvetica that's been redesigned. And I intend to buy that and replace Helvetica. I mean, to everybody else it looks the same, but it's beautiful. You should check it out. Josh Berger, thanks for tweeting me, Josh, today a bunch. Saw that. He wrote a book, The 30 Essential Typefaces. Is that the right title for a lifetime?
30 essential typefaces.
30 essential typefaces. And it's the most, the 30 most tested typefaces, and it shows them in use and talks about their intentions. And it's interesting because there's an essay about a person trying to take a Helvetica free, like a Helvetica fast. Can you do it? And you see like the intention behind a typeface and then how it gets used and how its use becomes its identity. Sometimes you have a reason for something and then people make it their own. And that's one of the things. It's like with anything. Once you release something into the public, it's no longer yours. It's theirs. It's everyone's. And so you can't get mad when people don't use it the way you intended it to be used. You just need to do a better job next time, designing something that's going to solve the problem better. And the more you can be less upset when your stuff is out there and it's being all of a sudden used correctly, well, then you feel good about what you do because you guessed right. Because that's all we're doing is guessing in the end, trying to hone our intuition to serve that moment. I would not give you a font though, because that wouldn't do you a service. Just think of the person on the other end and design intentionally, I guess. Josh?
Well, you say words can't be trusted. What about letters? I mean, every letter has a etymology and history, whether it's Comic Sans or Airline, or they all have a story, right? They all come from a place.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's one of the things about using Comic Sans. It has a time and a place, and it's as you were saying, it's picking an appropriate usage for each, and knowing the etymology of can letters be trusted? They have a particular etymology.
Yeah. Well, the problem with the words can't be trusted thing was as I was going through this, I realized that I had made words the villain when villain was never words. When I wrote that down, I think I was around 6 or 7 years old. I just discovered that I had these problems with reading, which, by the way, I didn't know the ADD part didn't come along until later. Like I got the diagnosis, but my mom just called it dyslexia. So I think it was like an episode, I was just telling this to Aaron last night. I think it was like an episode of Smurfs, and Gargamel or somebody lost his memory, and he was like friends with the Smurfs that episode, and then, I think maybe Handy or Smurfette, somebody, the wise person of the moment said, Gargamel can't be trusted. And it was like this moment where I was like, words can't be trusted. Words can't be trusted. And I mean, that's pretty deep for a 7-year-old, I guess. But in going back through this, it's like that initial meaning, it actually kind of proves, like disproves and proves my point at the same time. You lose the intention in poorly laid out design. The dry viewer, the person who just starts interacting, they don't know what the intention was, what was going on in here by the person who typeset it. Or in my case, I didn't know what I meant when I wrote it when I came back to it later. It was that exercise of thinking about it that allowed me to remember. I mean, I had a thought, and that thought pretty much stayed with me until 3 days ago. That same feeling, that same decision that I made, which is alarming, right? How many decisions have we made when we were children? I'm going to do that. Always going to, whatever, eat Doritos for the rest of my life. You stop thinking about, which would be a horrible decision, by the way. How many things have we stopped considering that we just decided are the right thing? Letters can't be trusted, no. They can't either.
What got you interested in architecture?
Well, I've always thought buildings were beautiful. I grew up going to a Greek Orthodox church on the other side of the river, and as a kid, this was also confusing when you're trying to learn language, and Orthodox services are really long. And we come into church and the whole thing would be in Greek. So I'm trying to learn words and all I hear is like 3 notes and babble. So I would always look around at how beautiful these long, stained glass windows were. And I think it's a beautiful church, but I don't think that church is awe-inspiring in the way that, some beautiful modern architecture or like a, Gothic cathedral in Europe is. But it made me notice structure. And I really never saw a difference between the big and the little things we do, I think I always felt like if you can conceive it, then it's yours to own. And when I was young, my mom was an illustrator and a graphic designer, and so because I had a lot of energy, she made me her production designer. I remember she was doing coloring books, and she would have me do letter set type. So I would be on her floor. She had her awesome table, which I wish she didn't sell, because I want it. And I would be on the floor on a cutting board from upstairs from the kitchen, and I'd be doing letter set type, and she'd be telling me, that needs to be on the baseline. You shouldn't put Futura with. I'm trying to think of another font. All she had was Futura. I think maybe she had Helvetica. Definitely not the other one. And I remember trying to take the smallest font that came on that letter set sheet and trying to set it just like perfectly. And then I remember seeing in an art book, I remember seeing that sculpture, that love sculpture. And I don't think it's that giant. It's pretty big. But you guys know what I'm talking about? Love with the... Yeah. And I just remember thinking it was giant. And then the idea of scale became really interesting to me, of like what's small that I can make giant and what's intimate or what's large that can be made intimate. Because I think that's what's amazing about spaces and like physical spaces in general, is can you make a big physical space or any physical space feel, and intimate might not be the right word, but making a space feel like a place that any one of us feels comfortable, because everyone's been uncomfortable in spaces before and it sucks. And I don't want to make anybody feel that way ever. So I don't want to design that either. Yeah.
One thing I think a lot about, just in terms of typography and intention in typography, is that it's particularly obvious where there's a lot of intention in things like propaganda and particularly fascist propaganda. And sometimes, I guess I don't know if I really have a question, but it's more like I'm just interested in the idea of like how sometimes that intent is pretty evil is not a word I like to use, but it's malignant maybe. And then you have people using things like Comic Sans or Papyrus, right, with this like sort of like a lack of intent, but the overall like sentiment behind it is innocuous. And I guess maybe the question is about using type as like something to manipulate emotions through intent. And yeah, I guess that's another question in my head yet, but it's something that I've thought about a lot just in terms of type in general, that like a lot of times an intention that's used in advertising is used, it's a communication tool, but when it's used with like that severe like laser point intention, a lot of times it's used for things that are maybe malicious, or at least trying to sell you something which isn't necessarily malicious.
It can be.
Yeah.
Depending on what they're trying to sell you.
Yeah, totally.
Taco Bell.
Yeah.
It would be great, right, if like there was a whole movement, like a whole like guerrilla movement, and like all the posters were in Comic Sans, right?
That's the funny thing
great.
is like people don't use Comic Sans ironically. Like I tried to do that actually in a
They don't do that intentionally.
yeah. Right, exactly.
It's like the driest of humor.
Like, everybody's like, no. I was like, well, this is funny, right? No. I did the same thing with Papyrus. We were doing this sort of like mock, like meditation video, and I used Papyrus because that's like super appropriate for that, like that stereotype. And they were like, no. Everybody was like, no, I can't even bear it as like an ironic statement.
The next round was Comic Sans.
The carpet sign, right? And like the carpet sign being like. So like yeah, they won't let you know there's carpet there. That's like it's like the whole of the thought. But like the intention was just to get like we got to put a sign up that says carpet. It's relatively innocuous, Whereas like I don't know, I think about like Nazi Germany, and they were super specific about getting rid of like accidents grotesque and any of those kind of clear typefaces and going back to like the black letter, as far as I understand it, and I could be like, I could be a little foggy on it. But there's so much like severe intention is oftentimes used for I don't know if that's.
No, I could talk about Nazis all day, guys.
What do you think of the Hillary?
Oh, the Hillary logo.
Right, this is a Helvetica H, yes?
Mm-hmm. Probably.
It's not the swastika. Although it is pointing to the right.
Have you noticed about the Hillary thing? When Barack first ran, he was the only one that ever had it was like the first time anybody had imagined designing something. And I don't know if you guys remember what Hillary's thing looked like, but it was set in like Garamond or something, and it just looked like. It speaks to the point of designing something with intention, right? Like, because you see something like that, and then you saw the McCain thing, and you saw, like, it all looks the same. It doesn't, and maybe other people were normal and I'm just weird, but when I saw that, it made my eyes would just kind of glaze over. I wouldn't even look at it because it just looked so typical.
I remember the Bush Cheney was actually, I thought that was like really effective. It was really powerful in terms of like the composition, and it was like heavy type, and it, you know, especially to the Carrie one was like,
wasn't it the same? Wasn't it just like
light and like it's not even there, like nothing substantial about it, which is obvious. I mean, that seems intentionless. Whereas like the Bush Cheney, I mean, it's not the most amazing thing that ever happened in graphic design, but like just in terms of like political logos, it's really, you know, it was much more powerful than the Carrie Edwards.
I'd love to respond to the comment about the kind of propagandist type, but you spun me around. So
it's not even a real question. So
this is a really good book, and it's about I think it's Czech constructivist design, ABZ. It's really good. It's like not the regular kind of, you know, it's like you see a lot of like the same 4 propaganda posters that in like art history, you know. There's a lot of really amazing and beautiful things in that book, and it kind of, it's like the less propaganda version of the same design ethos. And I think that's one of the things is like you'll see something and then it'll become famous for one thing and then it just becomes that. You know, it's like, since we're talking about Nazis, the swastika, right, was not the Nazis. It was the other direction, and it was the 4 seasons, and it was part of many cultures in many forms. And I mean, it's a really beautiful, in an abstract world, it's a very beautiful design piece when it's part of patterns. And I mean, I've seen it carved in like chairs from prior to Nazi Germany, and I mean, it was its own thing. And then they did what they did with it, and now it's a swastika. It was a swastika before the Nazis owned it, but they bought it, and now they own it, and I don't think we'll ever get it back, which is a bummer. It's a bummer when something that has a good history, a holistic history, gets co-opted by something else.
Well, I think I've been thinking about it, and I think the thing overall that's interesting to me is that like using shapes like you're talking about, and agreeing that they have a meaning, and agreeing that they have this, and then, you know, there's a word that's like a visual representation of that meaning, but beyond that, where it turns into like the geometry, so you have the same letter in different ways, but there's like, it's like there's like a secret, it feels to me like a secret language of visual information that comes from like a specific typeface or specific geometric shape that resonates on like an emotional level that describes what you're seeing. And I think it's really, you know, I guess it's really powerful in propaganda, and I guess it's like I feel like that's the thing that I'm trying to scratch at. But
I think I know where you're going with it. It's the subtleties, right? The subtleties, and like, yeah, we talk about popular typefaces, which is amazing that we have popular typefaces in culture these days, but they all mean something different. And right now we're in a really noisy time with type since digital type happened. Like, there's so many typefaces where, you know, rewind to the 80s and the 70s, and there were like the fonts that were designed well, that had characters that were designed for a purpose, and you had your finite amount, which were still a lot, but there was a finite amount. And now, like, anybody can do it, so there are so many of them. How do you choose? And it's easy to say, have intention, think of your end audience, but the more fonts you consume, the more culture you consume, the more I think you develop your own kind of opinion of what something means. And I think if you can develop that opinion and have some real support for that opinion, then you can use whatever font you think is the right font to use, because you have a reason, you know? And the subtleties, the subtleties of a slab serif feeling, you know, a little bit more fancy than a regular serif. It's closer to Times, but it's not, you know, just a geometric font. Everyone has a different voice, and that's something that I cut out of this conversation, was that we evolved as a species, and before we even were our species, we were using verbal communication. Other animals use verbal communication. We were using whatever, grunts, some type of syntax. But we've been doing that forever. And then just recently, if you look in the grand scheme of things, we introduced verbal language. We started handing down information. And that verbal language was our first bit of technology that we invented as a race, as a culture, as a race, not a culture. And because all of a sudden we were able to record information and pass it to generations through song and lyric and rhythm and telling the same story over and over. I mean, the reason that there was only one story until the Odyssey, or until the Iliad and the Odyssey, or one story, there were a handful of stories, but they're all the same story, was because that was the thing that you learned. It was the one thing that you learned, and people would refine their craft just to tell this one story better. And then a new piece of knowledge would come up, and they would add it into the story. And they would repeat it like here, and then they repeat it in the middle of the story, and repeat it at the end so people would learn it. And that's how, because nobody wrote. And then all of a sudden we started keeping track of things. We started doing a little, I also took this great thing out about how I was going to make an example of the first bit of written typography being the Ten Commandments, right? It's probably the oldest that we can know of, that we can never see. But it was written, it was recorded. That moment, you know, the moment of inspiration, there's so much power in that moment that we could never understand, because all we have are the Ten Commandments. It's a list, you know? Words were meant to record information, but the character and the power behind communication still rests in verbal communication. And I think that understanding the right typeface to use and how to enhance it with color and how to create a better experience for people, we can make better typography. But typography, it's not equal to verbal communication. It's always going to be an approximation or another thing.
So do you think that maybe, Tobias, this ties into what you were saying too, it's like there's this whole emotion part, because when you're speaking or conveying yourself verbally, I think there's emotion is easily conveyed. So maybe typography is used, different typefaces help convey ideas through eliciting emotional responses that you want someone to have to, say, a brand or a sign or you know, or anything. So I think that a lot of that ties into maybe their history, but also the aesthetic of it, or whether it has rounded corners or how fat elements of it are, etc. So, yeah, I don't know. It's more just a comment, but I think it's a way to demonstrate that emotion at times.
It's a strangely hard to grasp point.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's hard to work through, because it's such an intangible quality, right? It's like we spend our whole lives ignoring what type looks like. You're supposed to read, and then all this subconscious feeling comes from hierarchy and type choice and design. And I'm definitely not disagreeing. I definitely agree that different type suggests different emotion. But I don't think there's an archive that really says how to pinpoint an emotion with type. I think it's by consumption and internalization of as much as you can, noticing. I think one of the reasons that I notice it is because of design. And when you're designing a font that's this way and then you're designing a font that's that way, you really are spending a lot of time focusing on the details. So you internalize more of those details. A technical side of choosing a font would be the ones that are designed by prominent designers, tested designers. Those are oftentimes the ones that are easiest to use, and they're not going to crash your computer over time. I'll just throw that little side note in there. Tobias?
Another thing that I'm kind of thinking about is, so there's obviously the cultural perception of what a typeface means. I think a lot about like when you get Japanese written in English, not the language but the letters. Like
Yeah.
it just like has a really specific quality, which I think is just like the typefaces were chosen by someone at some point to be the ones that they use. But it's sort of, they all have the same feeling to me. Maybe I don't have enough resolution, but they all look the same. But there's cultural parts, but there's also like there's biological parts which are obvious, which are like some typefaces are easier to read. Some are more difficult to read, so there's biological in that sense, but then there's like the psychological, biological element, right? Where it's like, and I'm wondering how much do you think that that's biological as opposed to cultural? Like how much of the or how much do you think that we're responding to it on like a biological level that isn't like just like the sphere of cultural influence that's telling us that this is like, okay, this is this is the nicest shape.
Like we're biologically seeing some type of connection to the shape of an O being a circle that is the sun, that type of thing. Shit, I don't know. I mean, I will say that prior to having children, I thought that we were a product of our environment. I was pretty solid on that. And since I've had two boys that are not identical twins, I've been able to see these two biologically different human beings that have an absolutely amazing different personalities, different ways they respond to things, and as similar as they are in certain regards, they're just different. One is like the mega social that comes and runs and wants to give you a hug, just wants to be there. The other one wants to do his own thing. And then all of a sudden, after 20 minutes of them just kind of being chaos, they'll like do a weird synchronized swimming thing for 10 seconds. And then I'm like, really, like what the hell? So as far as that question goes, I'm kind of in a weird place right now. I can't really answer it.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts about current trends in typography. In particular, I've noticed a lot of lighter weights, that sort of thing, and also what you think might look incredibly dated. It's very modern right now. Like, what are the current trends that's going to say mid-2010s, or
I think that we're living in an era of higher resolution handheld devices, so we're able to see things more clearly, smaller, better operating systems. So we're able to have finer line weights that look beautiful. So I think that's why we're seeing lighter weights. The technology is definitely driving that, or the ability at least. And then you have designers at the helm who are like, well, we can do it, why don't we, right? We're not living in the age of, when I was growing up, you would design something in a weight that was legible, and you design it in black and white, and if you're going to add a color, you'd take a piece of acetate and you'd cut it with an X-Acto knife, and then that would be your color, and you'd have like a bunch of different of the same color of acetate, but one would have green written on it or whatever. And that's what the technology was at the time. Now, as far as what's going to look dated, I don't know. I'm a really big fan, personally, of humanist typefaces like Frutiger and some of the neo-humanist typefaces. Vista's one that's been used a lot. I like the characters, the way they're designed. A humanist face, for those of you who don't know, if I had a board, I would write it, draw it. I can say what it isn't. So, a humanist face, the counters, or the terminals, the way that like the S would end wouldn't be on the 90 or the 180. They're slightly narrower. They have a little bit more of a curve to them, but they're sans serif faces. I honestly feel like when I see them in use, they never really feel like they have a place for me. I feel like in signage, fonts that are structured work really well in signage. They connect with the built environment really well. And for when serif fonts are used, there's a purpose there. And when you have this kind of font that's not really this and it's not really that, it just kind of, I feel like humanist faces in culture are lacking a place right now. They're lacking an opinion, they're not, I haven't really found where they go yet. And maybe that's going to be their strength. Maybe in 20 years somebody will do some amazing new and it will revolutionize the world, and they'll happen to use a Frutiger, and all of a sudden that will mean whatever this new technology is. I don't think we have it yet.
Do you ever practice anything? Do you ever incorporate calligraphy or anything like that?
Yeah, I do. I love calligraphy. When my dad passed away, for some reason, I found myself tracing the Constitution. It was a weird way to grieve, but I taught myself calligraphy in that kind of constitutional style. It's actually one of the things on my website. I think that writing and when you can take something from your mind and actually commit it to paper, opposed to type it into your phone or type it onto a screen, something special happens in our cognition when we put a pen to paper, and it's beautiful. I mean, I think right now when you say typography, another series of slides I took, I did a whole study of if I didn't know what typography was, how would I start researching this talk? So I went to Wikipedia, I went to Merriam-Webster, which was horrible. Their definition was horrible, and their design is real bad too. But what I really would do, that's not how I would really go about it. I would go to like Instagram and I would go to, social media and see what people are saying. And on Instagram, it's like everything is just like calligraphy craziness. I think right now, to most people, calligraphy and typography are the trend. That's the connection in culture, which is great. I think more people need to be crafting type with their hands. I think that when you put pen to paper, it not only takes something from your mind and makes it permanent, it also forces you to embrace your mistakes. I mean, that's one of the greatest things about being a pen designer. And in the days when you had to pen something in graphic design because you were making like a photo, camera-ready art, if you screwed up and you were already, an hour into working on this thing, there's only so much erasing you can do and so much tape you can do. Sometimes you just got to just make the line thicker, And it made for a different type of design. I think that the technology really drives the way that we do things. And with computers, we have so much control that it's stifling at times. It's easy for us to micromanage ourselves and our process infinitely into a place where we have this great little corner of process, but we're not getting anything done. And it sure as hell doesn't feel like anything. It just is rigid and, where when you're doing something physically, I feel like, that's natural, right? It's like we're meant to interact with things as humans, and when I see everything through my kids' eyes, and you have a phone, and you're constantly taking pictures of them, and then you're maybe, checking a text. You can't tell them, no, I'm taking pictures of you right now. They just know there's a thing in your hand that you're waving around, and that's all that they can see. And it really makes you realize that that thing in your hand, that technology in your hand, is augmenting your experience. And I'm not saying it is bad, but it's not the same, I guess. It's a whole different topic.
When you're collaborating with people doing like graphic design and typography as a project, or even just doing it all yourself, or do you find that, like, for instance, let's say if you want to make an advertisement for something, that the typography dictates the tone of the graphic design, the piece of design, or the other way around, or if there's one more than the other that you have experience with, like, masks and patterns, and then if you had like leaves and stuff in the background, which one would have more of an impact or drive, the feel of the project?
For me, I'm constantly trying to reinvent the process. It's that kind of beginner mindset. So I feel like I'm trying to always reserve the right to decide. So I don't go with one thing first. I guess if I'm sketching, it's a lot of times it feels like it's about the form, but if I'm rebranding a company, like I'm still working on the rebrand of Danner Boots, and the typography was like second, because the redrawing the calligraphic mark to feel the way it needed to feel was so much the driving force that you want everything to have like a place to breathe, I also think it's if you're doing a website, there are certain constraints that you and best practices that you've learned to live with. So those are going to affect your type choice. If you're doing like a poster, maybe that type will be the activating piece that drives it all. So in short, I don't think I do one thing or the other. Yes?
So what are the things that you carry with you from your time doing the archaeological dig?
Yeah, what do I carry with me? I don't know. I go back to it a lot in stories. I carry conversations. I went with my wife, so we talk about it a lot. That was an amazing experience, life-changing. I'm Greek, so it was the second time I had gone back, but in a different context. And we went to art galleries and all the different, it was with the school, so we went to all of the different famous archaeological environments. And then we ended up in Stymphalia, which is, it was a mercenary town or mercenary village that was being excavated at like 400 BC, I think is where we were when I was dusting shards of clay pots off. Aaron found a coin from Athens. I wish that we were both carrying that around with us, but I think it ended up in the University of British Columbia's stash of plastic bags that nobody looks at. I learned a lot about culture. I think when you dust off, and I'm going to use her example because it's a lot more dramatic than a broken piece of pottery, which was exciting for me, but when you find dirt that just looks like every other dusty dirt that you've ever seen, and it's 110 degrees, and if you bend over a little bit more, the drops are going to make a pattern on the dust. And then all of a sudden you brush it, and you see a coin with a little owl on it, or a little face of Athena on it. When you uncover something that's that old, from 400 BC, you realize that you're the first human being that's laid eyes on this in like almost 2,500 years. And that's an amazing feeling of placement, of time. I think time is really hard for us to fathom. But when you connect with time in a way, when you interact with time in a way that really makes you think about it, like that makes you feel small, I think. Made me feel like being there, you see what people can do, what people did. You want to know their stories, and I think it made me want to tell stories a little bit better, a little differently, a little bit more inspired, I guess. All right. Thanks, guys.
So we returned May 5th with two-time Curiosity Club alumni Amber Case with her talk, Designing Calm Technology. We cannot interact with our everyday life in the same way we interact with a desktop computer. Technology shouldn't require all of our attention, just some of it, and only when necessary. How can our devices take advantage of location, proximity, and haptics to help improve our lives instead of get in the way? This presentation covers the history of calm technology, wearable computing, and how designers can make apps ambient while respecting privacy and security. We'll look at ambient notifications, compressing information into other senses, and designing for the least amount of cognitive overhead. and it should be really good. Every talk that she's given has been amazing. So I hope to see you guys there. Let's have another round of applause for Beth.
Well done. Thank you very much. I wish that I would have had it at the end of the
I still can be a star.
I'm a big website too.
Yeah, all of that's